Hi everyone. Welcome back to Julia's story. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. By 11 my feet felt like wet stones. Grease and rain clung to the alley door, and the smell of coffee that had lived too long in a pot refused to leave the air. I wiped a circle on the hostess stand with a cuff of my sleeve and watched the street outside shine like a black ribbon. When a night is this tired, even light looks sleepy. I am Mara. I carry plates and names and the soft apologies people whisper when their hunger outruns their patience. The bistro keeps a piano no one plays and a vase of lilies that try too hard. I walk between tables with a smile that fits like a jacket I found and taught my shoulders to love. Tips pay rent. Spare coins buy soup for the man who folds himself into the bus stop like a closing book. Kindness is my only hobby, I never quit. He arrived after the rush, the millionaire people whisper about as if his first name were a password. Damien Claremont. Column photos make him look colder than weather. In person he carried a quiet the room obeyed. Black coat. Rain on the shoulders. Eyes that kept moving, taking inventory like a careful storm. Good evening, I said. The words I have said so often they live in my mouth even when I am alone. He nodded once. The corner table by the window, the one that makes the city look like a story you could still change, was free. I set a glass of water down and the lemon sank like a coin that had decided to be brave. He did not read the menu. He watched the door the way men do when they are trying to decide whether to leave a life or go back to it. I brought bread, soft and warm, a small mercy, and he tore it with long fingers that looked like they had built nothing and signed everything. When he said thank you, it sounded like a sentence he did not get to use enough. Halfway through his soup, the room shifted. Mrs. Carruthers from the corner table snapped her fingers with the blunt urgency of old money. Her ring flashed. Her voice did not rise, it cut. My bracelet is gone. Chairs paused. Forks hovered. The piano wished it had learned a song for this. I felt heat climb my neck and then leave. Theft turns air thin in rooms like ours. Eyes swing to the nearest easy story. A waitress with a heavy bag. A tired night. A ring that wants a villain. The manager came from the back with a tie knotted for war. His smile was the kind that apologizes for you before you know what for. Mara, he said softly, bag please. I knew the law, the sign by the time clock written in small letters that have never lifted a box. Staff bags subject to inspection for the safety of our guests. I held my strap a second longer than manners permit. Inside was my whole day. A crushed granola bar. A letter from my mother folded to the size of a prayer. The photo I carry when loneliness feels like a weather report. A woman laughing in a kitchen, flour on her cheek, a little boy leaning against her hip with a gap-toothed grin I could never forget. My throat tightened around that picture the way a fist tightens around a key. The manager reached, then hesitated, as if he had remembered he was human. Mrs. Carruthers waved her hand in the air like she was shooing a fly made of workers. Just look. It's always the bag. Damien stood before I knew he had moved. He did not raise his voice. He said let me, as if he were asking to carry a heavy pan I should not be made to lift. The manager stepped back the width of a breath. Mrs. Carruthers smiled in a way that told me she thought money had solved itself. I nodded because sometimes survival looks like saying yes to what you cannot control. I set the bag on the hostess stand where I keep the lost and found, a place that knows how to wait for people to remember what is theirs. My fingers let go slow. The strap fell and made a soft thud like a tired heart deciding to keep going. Damien did not paw through it. He opened the zipper like a person who had been taught to touch pages, not pry them. His face did not change at the sight of a waitress's life. Lip balm scarred from winter. A pen that leaks courage. Receipts sharp enough to cut. He lifted the granola bar and set it aside as if clearing a table for a better story. He found the letter and did not unfold it. He reached the photo in its cracked plastic sleeve, and for the first time the room heard him breathe. His hand stilled. The light caught the edge of the picture and made the kitchen behind the woman glow, that small square of joy paid in flour and steam. He looked at the little boy, at the gap-toothed grin, at the way his small palm was pressed to the woman's apron like a seal. The sound he made was not surprise. It was recognition, learning it had a body. "Where did you get this?" he asked, softer than the lily's smell. The manager leaned in too far. Mrs. Carruthers craned her neck the way curiosity does when it forgets to be polite. Somewhere in the back, the dishwasher stopped mid-clatter and listened with his hands wet. My mouth was a door I had been guarding all my life. I swallowed. The rain pressed its forehead to the window like a friend who has run too fast to keep up. The photo lay between his fingers and my day, and suddenly everything felt fragile and loud. "It is mine," I said. "My mother kept it. I carry it when the night refuses to end." I tried to keep my voice even. I failed. The vowels shook like spoons. He looked from the picture to me with eyes I did not yet know how to read. The ring on Mrs. Carruthers' finger flashed again, impatient for a thief. The manager cleared his throat the way men do when they want to keep a room in the shape they understand. Damien lifted the picture closer to the light. His thumb shook, just once. Then his jaw set, as if a story he had buried had clawed back to the surface and demanded a chair. He turned the photo over with a care I have seen only when people touch newborns and old books. On the back, in my mother's looping hand, a year and one sentence lived. "For my little star. Your father will find us when he wants to be brave." His eyes found the handwriting like a ship finds shore by smell. He closed them for the length of a breath. When he opened them, the room had changed temperature even though the windows were still wet and the lilies still trying. "This woman," he said, pointing to the smile that has raised me through hunger and rain. "What was her name?" The words were a question and an apology braided together. I felt the answer rise like a tide I could not stop. The manager shifted. Mrs. Carruthers scoffed a sound shaped like boredom. The dishwasher's hands dripped quiet on tile. Damien looked at me as if the city had finally dimmed enough for him to see faces instead of reflections. He held the photo like you hold a key you did not know you owned. And before I could decide whether to lie or to risk everything, he turned the picture back and touched the boy's gap-toothed grin with a thumb that did not trust itself. "This is me," he said. His words pulled the floor an inch closer to my feet. "This is me." I felt the photo grow heavier in his hand, as if paper could remember the weight of a small boy who once smelled of soap and summer. The lilies stopped trying to impress. The room learned to listen. Mrs. Carruthers tapped her naked wrist with a nail that had never washed a dish. "Can we please find my bracelet?" She said bracelet now, not ring. The story kept changing its outfit to stay interesting. The manager flinched toward my bag like a man reaching for a fire with his fingers. Damien glanced at him without looking away from me. "We are not finished here," he said, quiet as a prayer that still expects to work. He turned the photo over again. His thumb found the sentence in my mother's hand. "For my little star. Your father will find us when he wants to be brave." The kind of line you tuck into your pocket when rent is late and the bus is mean. "What was her name?" he asked, and this time it landed soft, not like a demand, like a man knocking on a door he built and left. "Lena," I said. The room felt it. A name can warm a place faster than soup. I tasted mint from my shift tea gone cold. He breathed the name once as if testing whether his mouth could still carry it. "Lena." Mrs. Carruthers stood up, the chair's leg screeching a small tantrum. "The bracelet worth several months of my life," she said, every word trimmed neat. She peered into my bag as if wealth made her taller. Napkins, bills, a tiny jar of balm, A spare pair of socks rolled tight like mercy. No flash of gold. No guilty shine. Only the gravity of a long day. The dishwasher stepped out from the back, apron wet, eyes kind. "Check under the banquette," he said to no one in particular, the way people say drink water when a room forgets how bodies work. The busboy slid to his knees with the skill of a boy who has dropped more than he has been paid to carry. His fingers brushed dust and coins and 2 raisins that had decided to become artifacts. Then a small gold crescent winked at us from the dark and refused to be ignored. "Found," he said, voice cracking like bread. He wiped it with the hem of his shirt because only boys and saints clean things with their own clothes. Mrs. Carruthers swooped like a gull and snapped it from his hand, then rehooked it to her wrist. Mouth pursed like apology was a dish she did not eat. She looked at me and managed a line shaped like manners. Perhaps I was hasty. She turned before the words could turn to a habit and whispered to her husband that the city is not what it used to be. The city kept chewing on the rain and did not answer. The manager exhaled from somewhere under his tie. He reached for my bag and stopped midway, as if he had remembered that shame is heavier than soup pots. "You can put it away, Mara," he said, and his eyes tried to be new. Damien still held the photo. He traced the cracked edge. I saw the way his jaw worked, slow, like a man counting a story bead by bead. He set the picture on the hostess stand and placed his palm flat beside it, a measured promise to keep it from floating back into rumor. "Tell me where she is," he said, and the sentence bent under its own history. I wanted to wrap it in a towel and set it near the stove to rise without drafts. I packed my bag with hands that remembered when to be gentle. The letter went back in. The bomb. The socks. The picture stayed on the wood between us like a small, bright anchor. My tongue found the truth it had learned to hide. She works mornings at a bakery near the river. Evenings she sleeps early because the years steal rest if you let them. She keeps a jar of sugar for neighbors and a chair by the window for the light. There was a tremor in him, the first strong wind finally allowed to touch a tight sail. He nodded once and then again, as if negotiating with himself in a language only he knew. He reached for his coat pocket and pulled out a card no thicker than pride, set it face down as if numbers were too loud for this moment. "I am not asking for permission to hurt her with memory," he said. "I am asking where to begin to be braver than I was." The sentence did not dress itself in money. It came as a man carrying a small bucket to a very large fire. The busboy hovered at my elbow, eyes shining the way eyes shine when a story under the skin finds air. The dishwasher went back to steam and plates, singing a line from a song about doors and mornings. The manager straightened the lilies but left one petal on the wood, a delicate mistake that made the arrangement finally honest. Damien picked up the photo once more and studied his own small face like a map he had once folded wrong. His line softened. The night pressed its cheek to the glass and listened in. "We can step outside," I said, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. "The air will make it easier to say hard things." He nodded. The manager tried to follow with worry like a dog on a leash, and Damien shook his head, slow. "It is not your scene," he said gently, and for once the man understood and stayed. We stood under the awning where the rain softened to mist, and the alley's breath smelled like yeast and diesel and the cigarettes of men who have promised to quit. He tucked the photo into his wallet with care, past cards that bought silence and dinners that leave no crumbs. The wallet closed with a quiet click that sounded like a drawer accepting its new job. "Tell me one thing I should not say when I see her," he asked, looking at the wet street as if it could answer. There was humility there, raw enough to bruise if I mishandled it. "Do not say sorry like a receipt," I said. "Say it like soup. Warm and enough." He smiled with the left side of his mouth only, a boy's habit leaking through a man's training. He lifted his face to the rain the way you do when you are trying to be washed without confessing to wanting it. Then he stepped back inside and laid cash on the table without fanfare, a tip that could pay the busboy's ride for a week and leave him enough for a movie where the ending is kind. When he reached the door again, he paused. Lena kept a chair by the window, he repeated, as if the detail were a key. Then he left, a dark coat learning how to be lighter. I wiped the hostess stand even though it did not need it. I tucked my bag against my ribs like a small animal who had earned sleep. The busboy showed me the gold smudge on his hem where the bracelet had polished itself against his honesty. The dishwasher sent a plate out without a chip for the first time all night and grinned like a boy who had finally won a game against a machine. Near closing, the phone by the register rang once and stopped, shy. When I lifted the receiver, only the soft of the line breathed back. Then a voice I had not heard since lilies were for funerals and not for tables said my name like it had just remembered how to. Mara, the voice said, and the room around me learned a new temperature. He had found the bakery. He had found the chair. And I knew the next door would ask for a key I had kept on a string under my shirt since I was small. By 5 the bakery windows were fogged with sugar air. The mixer hummed its steady prayer and the oven breathed warmth that found the bones I had forgotten to forgive. I wiped the glass with my sleeve and the street outside answered with a thin gray light, the kind that makes promises carefully. Mama was already shaping dough, palms moving like she was teaching the day to be gentle. Flour dusted her hairline. The chair by the window waited the way it always does, angled toward the first light so it can climb her shoulders and settle there. A jar of sugar stood beside it with 2 spoons, in case a neighbor stopped by and remembered to be kind to their tea. I poured coffee and handed her the cup. She wrapped both hands around it and blew a little, humming that old song about boats that come back late and still carry good fish. The sound put something smooth in my chest. I almost told her everything right then. About the bistro, the bag, the picture, the man whose voice sounded like the edge of a storm trying to behave. But fear sat on my tongue and asked for one more minute. "You look like the night ran through you," she said, eyes soft and sure. "Eat a heel of bread. No one should talk to morning on an empty stomach." I ate from the heel while she salted the loaves, her fingers knowing the measure by memory. Outside, the river tested its banks, pushed a little, thought better of it. A school bus yawned past. 2 runners argued softly about shoes and then laughed into their own fog. When I finally spoke, it came out like a small confession, more breath than sound. A man came in late last night. He saw the picture. The old one. His face moved in a way I did not have words for. He said the boy was him. Mama's hands stilled. Flour drifted in the space between us like slow snow. She touched the place on the apron where the photo once lived before I learned to carry it. Her mouth formed a name and unformed it. The oven ticked as if it had remembered a story too. Lena, my mother, who has never been afraid of work or weather, set the dough down like it was a child that needed to know the ground is safe. She looked at the chair by the window and shook her head once. "Not yet," she whispered to herself, or to the morning, or to the promise on the back of a picture. The sentence about a father and bravery climbed into the steam and sat there like a long guest. The bell over the door lifted its chin and stayed quiet. First customers. Paper bags. Coins that had learned how to say please and thank you. The girl from the shop next door traded change for a cinnamon roll and a story about a cat who had decided to live behind their fridge. Mama cut the roll in half because some sweetness must be shared by law higher than money. I kept watch on the corner where the street bends toward the river. My breath started to count without me. 1 for the man who sleeps behind the bus stop and needs a warm roll tucked near his ribs. 1 for the dishwasher who sings when the steam has its hands on his throat. 1 for the boy in the photo who had a gap-toothed grin and a hand pressed to a woman's apron like a seal. At 6:30 the glass cleared enough to reflect us back, softer, the way a kind friend would draw our faces. Mama tied a fresh apron, blue with a thin white edge. She retucked the chair toward the window. The sugar jar waited with its spoons. I wiped my palms on my jeans because some doors demand clean hands even when they do not say it out loud. The bell finally rang, a small sound that made the room stand up straighter. He filled the doorway without trying, rain on his coat, hair damp, eyes learning a new job. Damien did not bring the city in with him. He left it on the mat like a good guest. He saw my mother and lost his balance by the width of a breath. Then he found it again and remembered how to walk. "Good morning," he said to the room. Not to the money or the bread. To the room. His voice made the oven listen. Mama did not move for a heartbeat. Then she lifted her chin, the way you do when you are about to hold a heavy bowl and have decided to do it with grace. She wiped her palms on her apron, faint circles where courage lives, and stepped out from behind the counter. "What will you have?" she asked, voice steady, as if names must be earned after sunrise. He looked down at the cases, at the plain rolls and the sugared braids. He picked nothing. He looked up again, and the breath left him for a second. He held out the photo, the same one that knows our pockets better than theater seats. He did not speak the name. He let the paper carry the first weight. Mama took the picture with hands that remember everything and forget nothing. Her thumb found the crack near the corner like a homing bird. Tears did not come. Not yet. Her face went quiet in the way cliffs go quiet when the sea tells the truth. He said, "This belongs with you." He said, "I am sorry," in a way that did not dress itself up. He put his wallet on the counter, empty hands open, a man ready to have nothing left to hide. A woman with a stroller caught the moment without meaning to and backed out, whispering, "I will come later," the kind of kindness that protects the room instead of the story. The street sent us its light without charge. The oven breathed and the mixer fell silent for the first time since dawn. Mama lifted the picture and then lifted her eyes. She looked at his face the way you look at a map you once trusted and lost. Her mouth shaped a small name, the one you save for inside rooms and rainy afternoons, the nickname no paper has ever printed. "Damo," she said, just above a whisper. The sound broke something and mended it in the same breath. He closed his eyes, the way men do when the first wave hits and they decide not to run. When he opened them, they were the exact brown of the boy who once stood barefoot on a porch in summer, and for a second I saw both faces at once. I stood there with a loaf in my hands, warm and ridiculous, the sugar jar glinting at my elbow, the chair by the window catching the first honest gold of the day. My heart knocked like a guest who has shown up too early for dinner and refuses to leave. Mama reached for the counter with one hand to ask the wood to keep her standing. With the other she touched his sleeve, light as flour, as if skin might forgive the calendar. Her fingers tightened because muscle remembers what mouths forget. He tried to speak. No sound came. He lifted his left hand as if to show a key or a wound or a life. Nothing in it but rain. He tried again, slower. And just then the bell over the door rang a second time, firm, and a shadow fell across the threshold that knew both their names long before I did. The second bell did not ring loud. It rang true. The door breathed in a gust of river air, and a coat the color of old slate crossed the threshold. A man stood there with rain bright on his hat brim, and a cane he did not lean on unless the floor needed telling who was in charge. His eyes were the gray you get after years spent instructing storms. They moved once across the room and found both our names without asking. "Morning, Lena," he said. The sugar in the jar seemed to still. Mama's hand hovered over the photo. Damien turned toward the voice with a boy's flinch that his body tried to hide and failed. The mixer clicked back to life and then stopped because even machines know when to wait. Mr. Claremont Sr. did not crowd the counter. He took the chair by the door instead, the one near the umbrella stand, as if asking permission to be in the room before asking anything else. He set his hat on his knee and his cane on the floor with care, would like a curt nod. "I baked these for the ferry workers," Mama said, because sometimes safety lives in small sentences. Her fingers moved to the paper bags. She folded a top and set it aside. She folded another. The work steadied her mouth. The man watched her hands like a pen watches paper it has written on before. He glanced at Damien, and what passed between their faces was not new, only uncloaked. Weather that has always lived over a field, finally allowed to speak its own wind. I was halfway behind the counter with a cooling rack that smelled like butter deciding to be kind. The jar of sugar breathed beside me. The chair by the window still held space for light. Damien stood with his wallet quiet on the wood and the picture like an old bird finally come back to the right roof. Mr. Claremont Sr. cleared his throat and the room straightened. The cane rolled a half-inch and stilled. He reached into his inside pocket and drew out a flat envelope that had learned the shape of his heart. The paper was creased at the lip. He turned it in his hands once as if warming it would make it speak gentler. "I woke with a sentence that belonged to someone else in my mouth," he said. "For years I gave it to the wrong son." His gaze moved to Damien for the blink of a breath, then back to Mama. His voice softened. "I should have carried it here." He did not open the envelope. He set it on the counter like a person sets down a baby when they finally admit their arms have been selfish. The paper made a small sound, shy and correct. On the flap, my name lived in a hand I had never seen write for me. Mama's fingers shook once and then refused. She wiped them on her apron, 2 slow circles where dough had been, and lifted the sugar jar lid as if to sweeten the air. The spoon tapped glass, clean as a bell. She slid a packet across to the man who used to sign weather into behaving and said, "Take it in your tea." Her voice did not ask if he deserved it. Her voice knew that sugar should not have to answer for anybody's pride. Damien did not sit. He leaned his knuckles into the counter and steadied himself the way I have seen men steady themselves before stepping onto a boat that moves even when the river looks calm. He kept his eyes on the envelope as if there were a compass inside, and this room had finally remembered north. I wanted to pull the air toward us in fistfuls until the room had enough. I wanted to iron the paper flat and take the tremor out of Mama's voice with a cloth the size of a kitchen. My palms remembered how to hold hot trays without saying ow. They found the wood and pressed there instead. The street sent us footsteps and then silence, like a polite neighbor who understands a wall can listen both ways. The oven ticked and released a new breath. Somewhere down by the ferry a horn sighed, late, unbothered. The sugar in the jar looked like snow that had agreed to stay. Mr. Claremont Sr. leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a posture no photograph ever caught him in. His face, which newspapers like to carve into stone, went human around the eyes. He spoke to the counter, to the picture, to the chair by the window that had been saving the morning for this exact minute. "I was a coward," he said, simple as a loaf. "I am a coward still. But I can bring a name out of the dark with both hands." He tapped the envelope once with a forefinger that had never learned a poor man's work and said something that made the sugar shiver. "Daughter." The word tried to stand and wobbled. It traveled from his mouth to the glass to the paper to the bones that built me and made their home in my ribs. Mama's head dropped with a soft exhale, not defeat, release. Damien's hand opened on the counter as if prepared to catch a heart that might fall and crack. The bell rang again, quick, not careful this time. A woman from the ferry stepped in with cheeks red from wind and held up her phone, breathless. "The town site is posting a notice from the Claremont office," she said without seeing the scene she had stepped into. "Public apology. A foundation gift. A correction." Her voice was naked with relief, the kind that comes when a mountain finally admits it is only a hill. Mr. Claremont Sr. did not turn. His eyes stayed on me. He nudged the envelope closer. "Open it," he said, and the cane rolled another half-inch, a small old soldier changing guard. I slid a nail under the paper, slow, as if the flap might bruise. The paste gave with a sigh that sounded like a door deciding to remember the purpose it was built for. Inside, something waited that had lived too long without sun. Paper has a sound when it lets go. The flap sighed and the bakery seemed to lean in, the way our town leans toward the river when the ferry horn calls. Inside lay a letter creased to the softness of cloth, a thin photograph folded around it for courage, and a loop of worn plastic that made my breath forget itself. I lifted the loop first. A hospital bracelet, cloudy with years, the kind they cut from a mother when the world starts breathing in a new voice. The print was faint but still stubborn. Lena. Female. Time of birth written sideways like a secret passed along a busy hallway. There was no father line typed. But at the edge, someone had written in pen that had bled a little into the plastic. Claremont in small letters like a man testing how a name behaves next to skin. Mama touched the bracelet with the back of her finger the way you touch a sleeping bird. Her shoulders loosened by a stitch. She looked at Mr. Claremont Sr. without moving her mouth, and I understood there was a language older than apology. The photograph was next. Two young faces too close to the camera in a kitchen that could have been anybody's. Steam on the window. A pot laughing on the stove. Mama, hair pulled back with a ribbon, eyes bright enough to make the room warmer just by existing. Beside her a man with the same mouth as the one in our doorway now, only softer, a little foolish with happiness, a dish towel slung over his shoulder like a promise too light to notice. On the back someone had written after the bread rose. There is time. I swear it. The dot on the I had turned into a tiny star where the pen stalled. I did not open the letter yet. The paper itself smelled like lilies and old rain. Damien's fingers trembled where they pressed into the counter, a rhythm I recognized from nights when I have steadied trays on a bad ankle. Mr. Claremont Sr.'s hand covered the cane's head the way sailors cover a compass when the storm asks rude questions. "Read," he said. His voice had taken off its coat. I unfolded the page. The first sentence was crooked, as if the hand had argued with the heart while it wrote. "Lena," it began, and then started again in a steadier line. "Lena. I wanted to bring this myself. I wanted to be brave when it was cheap, not when it costs everything. But my father is a wall even when he sleeps. I am learning to climb too slowly. I have hidden this letter where I hide my fear, which means I have carried both too long." He told her things I had only guessed. About a night his own father had sat him down and made love into math. About the quiet threats that arrive in envelopes with seals, not fists. About a flight he almost missed because he had turned back at the door and then turned again because turning was what he had been trained to do. Every line felt like a piece of furniture dragged across a floor in the dark. He wrote my name at the bottom before I had one. "Little star," he wrote again, because some words hold a room together when the house refuses to. Then, smaller, a sentence without punctuation. "I will come when I deserve your mourning." The paper thinned where a drop had fallen and dried, not a tear exactly, the mark water makes when it is tired of being brave. I folded the letter back the way it wanted to be held and slid it toward Mama. Her thumb ran along the fold like a seamstress checking a hem. She did not cry. She has always kept water where it does the most good, in soup and tea and dough. Damien took in a breath like he was learning to be a person in this weather. He reached for the bracelet with 2 fingers and stopped an inch short, waiting for Mama's nod. She gave it, small. He held the loop and stared at the hand that had written the name on its edge. His voice found a low road to travel. He has used my name to open rooms. He is learning how to use it to open doors that stayed shut because they were mine. Mr. Claremont Sr. listened without defending himself. The chair near the umbrella stand made a little sound as if to remind him it was there. He looked at me then, straight on, and I saw the boy from the photograph hiding in the lines. "Time will not let us smooth. Daughter," he said again, steadier, and then softer, "if you will have the word." The oven gave up a new breath, butter and cinnamon, the kind of scent that reminds a body the world is still fixable in small ways. A neighbor knocked on the glass and saw our faces and stepped back, palm raised, promising to return after the moment had found its shape. I wanted to swallow the whole letter and hide it like sugar on my tongue, selfish and sweet. I wanted to hand it to the town and say, "Look, we were not crazy to hope." I wanted to turn back time by exactly 1 inch so Mama would not have had to learn patience from empty chairs. Wanting is loud. Wisdom asks to be spoken quietly. The doorbell on the phone jittered, the old brass bell on the town site chiming for new notices. I glanced at the screen. A statement from the Claremont office, just like the ferry woman said. Apology written in plain English. Money promised with dates and numbers instead of fog. A line at the end that made my throat ache. Recognition of private ties with gratitude to those who kept dignity when wealth did not. No more stories told over the heads of people who lived them. I read it out loud because some sentences need air to stand. When I finished, Mama put her palm flat on the counter and let the wood hold her up. She nodded once, like a woman counting loaves. Damien wiped his face with the heel of his hand and did not hide it. Mr. Claremont Sr. looked out the window at the thin morning and murmured something that might have been thank you to a day he did not deserve and was getting anyway. He turned back. There will be lawyers, he said, because men like me bring lawyers as if we were afraid of language without italics. There will be people who want to write our ending for their comfort. This time we will keep the pen on this counter. He tapped the wood. His finger left a faint powder print where flour had settled. It looked like a blessing that had not learned how to perform. I breathed. The ring at my throat, the key I have worn since I was small, warmed against my skin as if it had been told its work was done and did not know what to do with its hands. Mara, my mother said gently, and the sound of my name in her voice made the room a safer place to stand. I turned to Mr. Claremont Sr. I have a condition, I said, and the courage surprised me with its manners. No cameras here. No speeches that sell soup. If you want to know me, learn how I count change for people short by a coin. If you want to love my mother, stand at the sink when the rush ends and scrub pans without being asked. Damien's laugh cracked open in the middle like bread done exactly right. His father's mouth bent into something that did not belong to boardrooms. Done, he said. Then he looked toward the back as if he were about to ask where we keep the scrub brushes and remembered he had never seen that kind of cupboard. The bell over the door shook once. The town had a way of sending us witnesses when it mattered without making a parade. The dishwasher from the bistro stepped in with his hat in his hands and a smile like a child on a field trip. Heard there were buns, he said, and then saw who stood at the counter and stuttered into a nod that would have made any mayor proud. Mama slid a bag across, warm enough to make fingers grateful. He took it and retreated to the corner where sugar is added to tea. He did not pretend not to hear, and he did not try to listen harder than he should. Good rooms teach people how to stand like that. I held the hospital bracelet up to the light. The plastic caught the morning and kept it. The letters glowed a little. Lena. Female. Claremont ghosting the edge, refusing to disappear. I felt the weight of a last name I had never used sit beside me, not on me. I slipped the loop back into the envelope and slid it under the counter where we keep the small bills and the good pens. The letter I tucked into Mama's apron pocket over her heart because that is how stories last when paper gives up. The photo I placed next to the sugar jar, face up, the boy and the girl in their borrowed kitchen smiling like time was nothing they couldn't handle. Outside, the ferry horn called again, closer, like an invitation instead of an alarm. Inside, the oven timed the next thing to rise. Mr. Claremont Sr. lifted his cane and stood too quickly for a man his age, almost eager, as if a sink full of pans might be the exact penance he had been waiting to be assigned. Damien glanced at him and then at me. He reached for a towel without asking which hook was allowed to know his hands. He was clumsy, and the towel slipped, and we all pretended not to see because dignity is also a small mercy you offer the willing. I tied an apron around my waist. The rush was coming. The town had already started to forgive the morning for being difficult. As I moved toward the sink, the phone on the counter buzzed with a number I did not recognize and a message that would pull the day tighter than we had planned. It read, "I have waited years to tell you something your mother would not let me say for fear it would break your heart. Meet me at the bridge at noon. Come alone." The name under it made my skin go cold and my palms go warm at the same time. It was not his father. It was not the town. It was someone who always arrives with a story that asks you to pay twice. Noon came thin and bright. The river shouldered past its pilings like a tired worker late to lunch. I walked with my hands in my coat pockets so I would not wring them. Mama tied on her second apron and tried not to watch me leave. She tucked a napkin of bread into my palm the way you tuck courage into a pocket and said, "Come back with your name still yours." The bridge holds the town the way a palm holds a bird, soft but sure. I stood at the middle where the paint flakes like old promises and the water below talks in low, important tones. He was already there. Rafe Doyle. A man who smells like wet newsprint and impatience, collar turned up against a weather he thinks he can coach. "You came alone," he said. He always leads with praise that sounds like a receipt. "I came with a story that is not for sale," I answered, because the sentence needed to be true at least once before the hour got noisy. He smiled without teeth and leaned on the rail like a friend. He opened a folder the color of a storm that forgot to be dramatic. Inside was paper that had learned to pretend to be truth. He fanned it once so the river could read too. "You want to see what your mother never let me print," he said softly, as if kindness has a volume knob only he knows. The first page was a copy of a bank slip, numbers lined up like soldiers. Payment from Claremont Holdings to an account tagged with a name that looked like mine if you stood far away and squinted at the wrong hour. Lena DeVira, not Lena DeVika. The wrong letter sat there like a stain trying to pass for sunlight. "She took money to leave," he said. I heard his mouth move into the shape of an old story that gets a laugh in certain rooms. The paper smelled wrong. Ink and toner and the low ache of machines. No cinnamon. No kitchen air. No human heat. I traced the signature with my eyes and felt my mother's hand refuse to live there. Her name has a loop at the end that looks like a fish learning to breathe. This scrawl finished flat, mean as a yardstick. Rafe watched my face. He believes reactions are currency. He took out a slim recorder with a red that blinked like an eager child and set it on the rail. He let silence do the work rich men use lawyers for. He slid me another page. A note typed clean. "Miss DeVika, your cooperation is appreciated. Please accept this as support for future discretion. Signed, not by a man, by a firm that has wallpaper instead of a heart." At the bottom, in pen, a flourish meant to pass for a signature. The name sat there like a coat draped over a chair that does not belong to it. Hale. I remembered the way town says it. Victor Hale. The fixer people whisper about when they do not want to say coward out loud. Rafe cleared his throat. "He brought an audio file too," he said, as if I were his student, and this the day he finally let me hold the good chalk. He tapped the screen. The river's voice hushed for it. A recording of a night years back, the sound of traffic, the scrape of a shoe on stone, a man saying a price and a woman saying nothing. The woman's silence did not belong to my mother. Mama fills silence with breath that keeps other people's lungs steady. This silence belonged to someone trying on Lena's quiet and wearing it wrong. "Who is the woman?" I asked. My voice did not shake. It made the river look up and listen. He lifted one shoulder. "Anonymous sources prefer to remain myths." He tucked the recorder back like a magician who thinks he has shown enough thread. "We can publish without names," he offered. "We can let the town draw its own map and you do not have to hold the pen." The napkin in my pocket warmed my palm. Mama's bread still smelled like the hour it left the oven, vanilla and work. The copy paper's edges bit my fingers. A gull passed overhead and laughed like a drunk uncle at a serious speech. "You always ask for the price twice," I said. "First for the truth and then for the peace." He did not argue. He looked at the water the way gamblers look at a table when the dealer has started to shuffle. I pushed the bank slip back across the rail. The wind tried to take it and failed. The wrong letter in my mother's name frowned up at us, stubborn and fake. "That is not her hand," I said. "You know the shape of guilt when you can sell it. Learn the shape of a woman who writes grocery lists by memory because pens cost extra. Rafe's jaw tensed the width of a bean. He is used to deciding what weighs enough to be a headline. He is not used to a girl from the lunch shift refusing to pay for the paper and the silence in the same breath. He tried a softer weapon. "There is more," he said. A safety deposit box chipped into the corner of his sentence like an accidental confession. "There is a key you will want before the lawyers remember to love it." "Where?" I asked, and he smiled with relief at having moved me an inch. He pointed with his chin toward the old post office by the courthouse, the one with the clock that thinks 5 is more honest than 6. "Box number 68, he said. I shook my head once. "No price, Rafe. No cameras, no sights. If there is a key to a room that belongs to my mother's story, we will open it with her hand." He folded the folder shut with a sigh that said he would be back for another try, another tax. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of an imaginary hat and walked off with a step that wanted to be a swagger and learned humility halfway across the span. I stood and let the river talk until my breath learned its syllables. Then I walked to the post office with my palms sweating and my ribs counting like they do when I carry too many plates. The clerk behind the window wore a sweater with a tiny snag near the wrist and eyes that have seen people ask rooms to behave all day. I wrote Mama's name on the slip. I added mine underneath in smaller letters, hope shaped like habit. He slid the metal tray through the slot. In it lay a key on a rough loop, wrapped in old cloth that smelled faintly of printer ink and the inside of a drawer. The tag read 68 in a hand that had once been careful and had been made to hurry. The clerk raised his brows as if to ask, "Are you ready to stand when the floor moves?" I nodded. Boxes open with a sound like a cough. Inside this one sat a tin the size of a good biscuit and a ledger book with a broken spine. The tin weighed more than it should have. The ledger smelled of pencil shaving and the ghosts of small numbers. I did not lift either. I closed the box with the key still hot in my hand and put my name back in my pocket next to Mama's bread. On the way back to the bakery, the town felt like a room that had just learned it carries its own light. People stepped wide around one another without being asked. The ferry horn answered an echo. A boy bounced a ball and did not drop it. When I opened the bakery door, the bell sang the exact note my mother hums when she thinks no one is listening. She looked up, flower like moonlight on her cheekbone. Damien straightened from the sink, water dotting his shirt, his hands red and honest. Mr. Claremont Sr. had his sleeves rolled past the part of his arm a camera would recognize. They had all learned how to stand in a kitchen without a script. I set the key on the counter. I did not say Rafe. I did not say price. I only said there is a box with your name. The ledger is breathing inside it. The tin is heavier than its size. We will open it when your hands feel ready. Mama dried her palms on her apron, slow circles, the same gesture she used the morning the letter came out of its envelope and told us it had been waiting under a sleeping heart. We stood around the small box that was not yet in the room, like people around a cradle that has not arrived. Damien reached for a towel he had already folded because some men only learn later to have their hands occupied while their hearts think. Mr. Claremont Sr. set his palm on the counter and left a flower print that looked like a family crest someone finally went to the trouble to draw correctly. "Open it now," Mama said, and her voice was calm in the way women's voices are when they have decided not to let fear pick the time. I lifted the tin from the post office tray and pressed my thumb to the lid. It did not stick. It did not fight. It lifted with a small sigh like a seam letting go. Inside lay a small blue notebook, a loop of hair tied in ribbon, a photograph so faded it remembered more than it showed, and a folded sheet that crackled like old fire. The top line on the sheet made my stomach go tight and my shoulder blades loosen at the same time. Name of guardian if mother cannot be reached. The answer sat there in Mrs. Vale's careful hand from another life altogether, a woman who ran the maternity ward when the river still smelled like oranges after rain. She had filled the blank with 2 names. One was Lena. The other was the one the town had never been told. The sheet trembled once between my fingers and then decided to be steady. Name of guardian if mother cannot be reached. The answer did not blink. Lena. May Claremont. The ink was blue, the old kind that blooms a little when paper drinks too much weather. Beside the names sat Mrs. Vale's tidy initials, the same letters I had seen on the hospital wall when I was small enough to believe rooms were held together by women with clean hands and a good pen. Mama touched the page and the bakery changed shape by a teaspoon. Butter and cinnamon kept breathing, but there was a new note under it, something like lemon and rain. Mr. Claremont Sr. made a small sound that did not belong to boardrooms. Damien leaned his palms on the counter and looked at the name of his mother as if it were a door he had once walked past without knowing. May planned for you, Mama said, and her voice had a little heat in it, relief finding a chair. She said the name like bread easing out of a pan. It kept its shape. I opened the blue notebook. The first pages were grocery lists for a life that never bought lace. Milk, rice, soap. Then, tucked between measurements and notes about the price of eggs, small lines with a different weight. For Lena and the baby on wet days. For the sugar jar when the rent bites. For ferry workers whose boots eat their pay. Each line ended with the same two letters in a hand I already knew. MC. The ledger beside the tin hummed the same tune. Quiet transfers, never large, always on Fridays, always when the town softened its shoulders. Not hush. Help. The faded photograph at the bottom of the tin turned the room young. May stood beside Mama in a hospital corridor with paint the color of patience. No pearls. A cotton dress with pockets. A smile that did not ask the camera for applause. She held a bundle the way women have always held the future when it is too small to know its own name. On the back, Mrs. Vale's handwriting had added a date and two words that knew what they were doing. For safekeeping. Mr. Claremont Sr. rested his hand on the counter, knuckles pale. My wife went to the ward in the storm years, he said, not to be seen, to listen. I told myself charity would travel faster if our names stayed off the paper. He shook his head once, tired and true. That must have been a good lie to live with. He glanced at the wrong bank slip Rafe had tried to sell me and let the page sit where the flower could draw a veil over it. Damien touched the notebook like a man learning to read in a language he always secretly knew. MC, he whispered. He glanced at his father without asking permission this time. She had a ledger of goodness and you had a ledger of fear. I choose hers, he said, and it sounded like a vow he had been practicing in a mirror he finally trusted. The ribbon around the tiny loop of hair had gone sun-blonde at the edge. Mama stroked it with her knuckle, a motion that lives in the body long after sleep. Then she took a breath and looked at me as if I had grown out of a stone she had watered for years. We need one more name, she said. Mrs. Vale is alive. She will remember where she put the corners of this story when the men were busy folding the middle. We carried the tin and the blue notebook in a bread bag because paper does not deserve an armed guard when kindness is the cargo. The walk to the home smelled of cut grass and furniture polish. St. Helene's door breathed out lemon and linen. In the hall, a nurse tucked a blanket under an old man's elbow with the same care Mrs. Vale used to tuck corners on winter nights when the power went out and babies decided not to care. Her room kept its dignity. A radio low. A vase with one stem cut short so it would not have to try too hard. Mrs. Vale looked up from a crossword and her face knew us in pieces, then all at once. Lena, she said, sweet as soup. And then her eyes moved to me and got wet the way a sky gets wet right before it remembers how to be generous. Little star, she said, and the nickname found the air like a bird coming home inside someone's ribs. We sat. The blue notebook made a soft thump on her quilt. She put her palm over it and hummed the first bar of a hymn she always insists is for everyone, not just Sundays. I told her about the ledger, the name, the sugar lines with MC. She closed her eyes and nodded like a judge who has waited years to bless the correct case. May kept your names when men tried to file you under theirs, she said. She came to me with a plan. If she could not reach Lena, if fear spent all its coins, give this to the child when the morning was safe. She reached under her pillow the way grandmothers reach for peppermints and pulled out a flat packet wrapped in brown paper. It smelled like cedar and starch. The string had been tied the year I was born, and no one had cut it since. My name sat on the front in that careful blue ink that grows in people who know names can lift rooms when the weather is wrong. My fingers would not behave. Mama's hands steadied mine. Mr. Claremont Sr. sat on the edge of the chair, the way men sit in church when the sermon starts hitting home. Damien stood, then sat, then stood again, because some sons are learning which posture belongs to which feeling. Before I could loosen the knot, a shadow pulled the hall thinner. Footsteps that did not belong to nurses paused, then entered, careful but too sure. Victor Hale, rain-polished, smile like a pocketknife. He carried a bouquet no one needed and a folder the exact gray of thunder. He took off his hat and showed us all his good manners the way a pickpocket shows both hands before the trick. "I am late to the party," he said in a voice that tries to pass bread around while he counts the plates. He set the flowers on the dresser and the folder on his knee and trained his eyes on the brown paper in my lap. "My job is to keep families from drowning in their own rain. Let me help you put this in the right drawer." Mrs. Vale did not sit up. She did not need to. She lifted one finger and the room changed its mind about who to listen to. "The packet is not for drawers," she said. "It is for hands." Her eyes were bright and young all at once. She looked at me. "Yours, little star." Her gaze cut to Hale. Not his. He smiled again and it missed the chair. He tried a softer key. "The press is a window with teeth," he said, "and I am better at counting teeth than most." The string bit my thumb. Mama's palm found the small of my back the way she always has when the floor remembers it can move. Damien did not look away. Mr. Claremont Sr. kept his cane across his knees like a line no boot would cross without landing on a different street. I lifted the packet. The knot loosened under my nail with a little sigh. The paper peeled back slow. The scent that rose was old sun and lavender, the way closets smell in houses that keep their grief folded flat. Inside lay a letter in May's hand and a tiny envelope that had waited for me alone. On the small one she had written my name twice, as if the first writing had not been enough to keep it. Under it, in that same blue ink, a sentence that made my ribs widen to make room for something I had not known I wanted. "For when the bridge feels too far. For when you need proof that no one can sell your sky." Victor Hale shifted his weight. He cleared his throat as if to put price tags on air. He opened his folder the way men open umbrellas under roofs. Paper glinted. I slid my thumb under the tiny flap. The ring at my throat warmed. The room shifted its chair closer to me. Mrs. Vale whispered, "Go on." Mama's breath counted with mine. Damien nodded, slow, the way you do when a person is about to open a door you have watched them circle all their life. The little envelope gave with the softest sound. And at the same time, down the hall, a phone began to ring with the town site's bell, urgent and low, as if the river had decided to send news up the hill instead of waiting to be asked. The bell on the hall phone would not quit, low and steady, like the river reminding us it had witnesses. I slipped my thumb under the small flap. Paper lifted with a sound soft as breath. Inside lay a square of thin blue notepaper, a pressed wildflower the color of dawn, and a tiny brass charm shaped like a star, dull with loving. The note was 5 lines in May's hand, the same calm blue that had threaded our names together in the ledger. "Little star. If anyone tries to sell your story, step to the window and look up. You belong to your name, not to their papers. When the bridge feels far, put this star in your pocket and walk slow. People who love you will keep the other end of the rope. Come claim what sunlight owes you." The charm warmed in my palm as if my skin had been waiting for it. Mama's breath hitched and steadied. Mrs. Vale smiled in a way that made the room younger. Damien blinked twice, once for the boy he had been, once for the man he was trying to be. Mr. Claremont Sr. exhaled a wordless yes and set his cane aside like a promise he meant to keep with his hands. Victor Hale shifted, folder neat on his knee, bouquet forgotten. He started his sentence the way men like him always do, with care shaped like control. There are ways to honor privacy without inviting a storm. If we file the right papers, the town will learn the polite version and leave you in peace. I closed the little envelope and slipped the star into my pocket until it found the place next to the key I wear on a string. The world did not tilt. It simply learned my weight. I turned so the window could see me and let the pale noon climb my shoulder. Then I spoke, not loud, not small. No more polite versions. Not from you. We have our ledger now. It is blue and smells like flour and Fridays. It has a woman's handwriting in the margins and names of people who got soup when the river rose. If this town needs a story, it can be the one where men finally stop making math out of love. Hale's smile thinned, but he listened because even teeth understand doors when rooms choose them. Down the hall the phone stopped ringing. A nurse passed with a tray and did not stare. Outside, a gull called once and changed its mind. Damien stepped closer to the bed without stepping in front of me. If there is a press, he said, it will hear our words in our own kitchen. He looked at me for permission, and I gave it with the smallest nod I have ever learned to make. He turned to his father. No more walls. No more envelopes with storms inside. We allow sunlight or we do not speak. Mr. Claremont Sr.'s mouth found a shape I had not seen on him. Humility, unpracticed and real. He rose, old joints honest, and offered his hand to Mrs. Vale. Thank you for keeping the corners when we forgot the middle, he said. She patted his fingers as if he were finally the age he is and not the size of his name. I opened May's letter and read the rest, quiet, the way you read to someone who already knows the ending but needs to hear the words. She wrote that she had set aside enough for first months if the world tried to be cruel. She wrote that the chair by the window was hers, too, and that whoever sat there would not sit alone. She wrote that fear travels fast and mercy arrives with bread, and that I should learn to bake both without apology. Mama laughed, a small sound that tasted like salt and sugar at once. She took the star from my palm and pressed it back, not because she did not want it, because she wanted me to know she trusted me to keep it. My pocket felt right-weighted and true. Hale straightened his tie very slightly, as if he could tuck consequence under a collar. The flowers sagged. He lifted his folder and it looked suddenly poor against the blue of our notebook. He tried one more key. There will be noise, he said. It will hurt. I nodded. Then I said the line May had left for me like a stair when the ground is uneven. I will carry my name. You will carry yours. The sky is not for sale. Silence followed, clean and useful. Hale looked at the window and saw his reflection standing where weather used to work for him. He picked up the bouquet. He left without slamming the air. Some men know when a room has decided to tell its own story. We walked home with the tin wrapped in brown paper and Mrs. Vale's packet tucked safe under my arm. On the corner, the fairy horn sounded like a friend. At the bakery door, the bell sang the note that always lands where my ribs meet my breath. We opened the ledger on the counter between the sugar jar and the tip cup. The town came in 2s and 3s and stood the way people stand when they are ready to build something that will not fall. That night I sat by the window and let the streetlights write soft shapes on the glass. Mama fell asleep in her chair with a blanket over her knees and the hospital bracelet tucked under a saucer like a moon learning to rest. Damien washed pans without being told which stack belonged to courage and which to habit. Mr. Claremont Sr. took the trash out to the alley and came back with a smile and a story about the last time he was taught to do something new. I took May's star from my pocket and held it to the pane. The sky made no promises. It did not need to. It just kept being there, more patient than our grief, bigger than our pride. I thought of all the small hands that had kept us from drowning, some with money, some with bread, some with a simple nod at the right time. If you are tired, if your name feels heavy and the bridge looks too far, step to the window and look up. Put a small true thing in your pocket. Hold the rope someone else is already holding for you. Remember that papers are not the same as love, that ledgers can be written in kindness, that you are allowed to walk slow and still arrive. Hope does not shout. It sits beside the sugar jar and the sink and the chair by the window, waiting for you to sit and breathe and decide what you will carry into tomorrow. By the next Friday, the ledger lived on the counter like a small blue lighthouse. People wrote their names beside little needs and little gifts. Flower. Fares. A winter coat for a quiet boy who keeps winning at kindness. We circled what we could cover and drew arrows toward the jars that always find a way to fill. The page smelled like sugar and pencil and a town that has decided to believe itself again. Mama kept the hospital bracelet under the saucer by the register, not to display it, to rest it. When the lunch rush swelled, she hummed the old tune about boats and safe harbors. The chair by the window still faced the light. Sometimes Mr. Claremont Sr. sat there with his sleeves rolled and a dish rag in his pocket, as if he could keep a promise with soap and warm water. Sometimes he only tucked sugar into tea and listened like a man learning a new weather. Damien learned the sinks the way men learn roads they plan to walk for a long time. He stacked pans by size and remembered where the scrub brushes sleep. When the line bent toward the door, he lifted trays with his shoulder and nodded at customers the way a neighbor nods when he knows your worries by their first name. He kept a towel tossed over one shoulder like a flag that prefers work to speeches. Mrs. Vale visited with lavender in her pocket and a crossword folded to the clue she wanted me to solve. When she set her hand on the blue notebook, the edges softened, as if paper knows who has earned the right to turn pages. She called me Little Star and then called me by my name, both true. She tightened the string on a bag of lemons before she left, because some kindness is shaped like tidy. The town stopped whispering and started eating. Ferry workers took rolls to the docks and came back for seconds when the wind forgot to mind its manners. The dishwasher from the bistro brought his twins on a Saturday morning, and they watched the dough rise like a miracle that had decided to be practical. The busboy slipped coins into the tip cup and pretended he had not, so I pretended I had not noticed, and we both let dignity do its quiet job. May's star lived in my pocket. On hard afternoons I touched it with 2 fingers and the brass warmed quick, a small yes against the noise. I would look out at the river and watch the bridge hold us without bragging. When the sky went gray, I remembered her line about ropes and how people who love you keep the other end. Then I walked slow and still arrived. Victor Hale came by once, alone, without a folder. He stood at the door and took off his hat and did not step in until I nodded. He bought a loaf and left even before the change landed in his palm, as if he finally knew which rooms need less of him and more of the people who bake them steady. Later he sent a note that did not sell anything. It said, "Keep the blue book open. I am learning to read." At night, after the last pan dried and the mop water lost its cloud, I sat by the window with Mama. We did not count the day by sales. We counted by chairs held, jars shared, names remembered. Damien dried his hands and slid the hospital bracelet back under the saucer as if tucking in a story for sleep. Mr. Claremont Sr. turned the sign to closed and checked the latch like a father who has learned to belong to the room by earning it. Sometimes we opened the tin and read May's letter aloud, not because we needed the words, but because the words liked being useful. Hope kept choosing simple tasks. Butter softened at the right hour. Coffee went gentle into paper cups. Strangers left as less of a stranger. The ledger filled and emptied and filled again, a tide we did not try to own. If your days feel heavy and the bridge looks far, step to your window and let the sky count your breath back to you. Put a small true thing in your pocket. A charm. A folded note. A quiet promise you made to yourself when the kitchen was still warm. Walk slow. Someone is holding the other end of the rope. Keep your ledger where you can see it. Write in kindness. Pay in bread and names. And when the world tries to sell your story, set your hands in the sink, turn toward the light, and carry only what is yours into tomorrow.